Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into a skincare brand that's kind of quietly making waves. It's emerging from the Pacific Northwest, Seattle specifically, called Everyday Charlie.
Right. And based on the material we looked at, it promises something, well, genuinely different. A really refreshing approach, actually, in a
Yeah.
market that's often just overflowing with noise.
Exactly. This isn't just, another bunch of creams and serums. What we gathered suggests it's built on a solid foundation of science,
Oh.
blending some really cutting-edge ingredients with some of that brilliant innovation we've seen from Korean beauty.
Yeah, and the core idea that really stood out to me was this notion that you don't need some overwhelming 10, 12, maybe even 20-step routine for great skin.
Right.
You just need the right steps. Simple, but effective.
So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to explore what makes Everyday Charlie tick. What sets it apart, really, based on the sources we've got. Let's jump into what we found.
Okay, well, one of the first things that grabbed our attention was its origin. Seattle. You might think tech giants, maybe gray skies, but the material really emphasized the regions, like deep connection to nature,
Mm-hmm.
and how that seems woven right into everyday Charlie's DNA from day one.
Yeah, it feels less like just a marketing angle and more like a fundamental principle for them, doesn't it? We saw specific details highlighted, a real effort to avoid, plastic overload,
Yeah.
cutting out unnecessary packaging, and a clear stance against using ingredients that could harm oceans or, well, our bodies.
Right. And their choices around materials really reflect this commitment. They're opting for things that are biodegradable or reusable or fully recyclable. And this detail, I thought this was interesting. The product inserts are printed on seeded paper.
Oh, the kind you can plant.
Exactly. You can actually plant it. Such a tangible, kind of delightful demonstration of their whole eco-conscious thing.
It really positions their approach not just as eco-friendly, but almost like serious eco-conscious engineering. It shows that, luxury and responsibility can coexist.
Definitely.
And that connects so well to that growing demand from people wanting brands that show transparency and environmental respect, alongside being effective.
And speaking of effectiveness, let's get into the science, because this is where things get really interesting. We saw a clear connection drawn to Korean beauty principles that focus on hydration, prevention, innovation. It's been so influential globally.
But it seems Everyday Charlie isn't just copying K-beauty, right?
No, not at all. The material suggests they're kind of redefining it, taking those core ideas, blending them with modern science, and crucially focusing on real-life usability.
So streamlined, effective products, moving away from those huge routines that can feel like a bit of a chore sometimes.
Precisely. And we saw some fascinating product examples mentioned. Ingredients, too. There's a pH balance cleanser, for instance, designed specifically to protect the skin barrier. And it uses things like fermented green tea and a peptide complex they described as being really cutting edge, very new.
Wow, okay. And the moisturizer, that sounded impressive too.
Yeah, it's described as lightweight, featuring something called fullerene.
Fullerene.
Yeah, the claim made in the source material is that this molecule is an antioxidant, something like 250 times more powerful than vitamin C.
Whoa, 250 times.
That's the claim. Actively working to shield skin from, pollution, UV damage, oxidative stress, the daily grind, basically. That's a pretty significant claim.
250 times vitamin C. That definitely makes you stop and look closer. And what about the flagship capsule serum?
Ah, that one. It was described as a perfectly dosed sort of single bullet of hydration, collagen, and anti-aging properties. The language they used was no waste, no overthinking.
Simple, direct.
Exactly. The overall picture painted is of products that aren't just simple, but are described as wildly intelligent in how they're formulated and delivered.
So, okay, you've got the science, the simplicity, the sustainability kind of woven together. But, in today's market, plenty of brands claim those things. What did the material suggest makes Everyday Charlie really stand apart?
Well, what really seems to differentiate them, based on our reading, is that they aren't just selling an image, some unattainable ideal. They seem to be building around a philosophy, something rooted in confidence, self-trust, and consistency in your skincare.
And you can sort of see that reflected in the branding details, right?
Yep.
The material mentioned it's minimalist, very intentionally gender neutral. You won't find
Yeah.
pink frills or overly sexualized packaging.
Right.
And they apparently highlight using models who aren't heavily filtered.
Wow.
More real.
Exactly. And there's a strong emphasis on transparency, too. Clear instructions, information about where they source ingredients, formulas that are designed to just work without needing tons of hype. We even saw mentions of this sort of palpable integrity you feel when you interact with the brand. Whether it's holding the product, seeing community posts, or checking their ingredient lists, even down to how they seem to be pricing things fairly, despite using some pretty high-end active ingredients.
That feels genuinely refreshing, doesn't it? Especially if you've ever felt lost in that sea of confusing options or just overwhelmed by unrealistic marketing promises.
Yeah.
It speaks to building trust through, well, honesty and effectiveness.
And it seems that trust is being built with a really expanding audience.
Yeah.
The material noted a pretty significant shift in who's actually engaged with skincare these days.
Oh, absolutely. It's moved way beyond the traditional demographics, hasn't it? We're seeing young men getting interested, gender nonconforming individuals, even like middle-aged dads and curious teenagers getting involved. Skincare is increasingly just understood as, well, caring for your skin, which, happens to be your body's largest organ.
Exactly. And Everyday Charlie seems really designed to cater to this broader, more inclusive landscape. We saw details about them having fragrance-free options, or maybe just naturally scented ones. Straightforward instructions anyone can follow.
Yeah.
And visuals that feel genuinely inclusive. Their marketing seems focused more on inviting people to participate in, like, a process of progress, rather than chasing some elusive idea of perfection.
There was that specific detail, too, about featuring real users from Seattle, right? With real skin concerns like acne scars, redness, texture.
Yes.
And approaching those things with science and solutions, not, shame, that feels like a powerful departure from a lot of traditional beauty talk.
It really does. It underlines that sense of integrity we were just talking about. It feels like it's about real results for diverse, real people.
Okay, so we have this picture emerging. Science-backed, sustainable, simple, inclusive. It sounds quite compelling, but what's the market status right now? We saw some hints that there might be a sense of urgency around it.
Well, what's interesting is that it's still very new. They're operating on a small batch model, and it appears they're already experiencing pretty high demand. We learned they restock weekly, but the practicalities of using fresh ingredients and their specific eco-packaging, well, it means they can't just instantly scale up production overnight.
Okay, so supply is definitely limited then. That makes sense.
Precisely. And because of that, and probably the brand's unique positioning, there seems to be significant buzz already building. We saw mentions of, like, rumblings in online beauty forums, discussions popping up on Reddit, and early reviews starting to show up from some TikTokers.
Okay. The digital word of mouth machine is kicking into gear.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the suggestion from the material we reviewed is that this brand feels, well, poised to break into the mainstream. The implication is kind of, if this sounds like something that aligns with your values or your skincare needs, acting sooner rather than later might mean you're glad you got in on the ground floor, so to speak.
So that urgency isn't just marketing fluff. It seems genuinely tied to their production model and this rapidly growing interest. It does make you think about how certain brands manage that kind of growth while trying to stay true to their original mission, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it raises an interesting point for anyone navigating today's consumer landscape, really. In a market just saturated with options, how do you identify the brands that genuinely feel different, the ones that are perhaps more aligned with what you actually care about?
And based on our deep dive into this material, Everyday Charlie certainly seems to be presenting itself as one of those potentially different brands. If we were to pull together the core strengths highlighted, they appear to be successfully merging that sort of nurturing softness of self-care with the robust strength of science and the, well, essential soul of sustainability.
And that level of clarity, that kind of alignment, it is quite rare in a market that's often just full of noise. It certainly stood out in the sources we looked at.
So if you're curious, if you want to learn more or check them out yourself, the material pointed to their website, everydaycharlie.shop.
That's everydaycharlie.shop.
And maybe just a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
Think about that connection between taking conscious care of your skin, which, as we said, is your body's largest organ, and supporting sustainable practices, and fostering personal confidence through simple, effective self-care.
Are those aspects of well-being and maybe conscious living? Are they perhaps more deeply intertwined than we might initially realize? Something to mull over.